We guitarists are to 99% the same, anatomically speaking. We have the same muscles that activate the same joints, and our neural and signal transmission from our brain to our fingers are basically the same. But there's one thing where even I, as a firm believer in collective thinking, has to admit we are different here, and these are our hand sizes. Last week was the NAMM show, and I was running around the NAMM show like a maniac with this thing here, because I wanted to measure the finger and the hand lengths of some of my favorite players and good friends that I've met at the NAMM show. And from that experiment I learned one crucial thing: hand size does matter. Here we go. Hey guitar champion, what's going on? I'm 𝗚𝙗𝙢𝙚𝗦𝗖𝗟𝗏, back from my practice dojo, and welcome to today's video. A lot of guitarists love to claim that they have small hands, even that they're not really knowing the fact. It sounds kind of cool first, just like some players love to brag about not knowing music theory. And let's be honest, who willingly would admit that part of their guitar skills come down to just having luck in their anatomy? But is that really the case? Yes, guitarists and pianists with larger hands do have technical advantages. That doesn't mean that they don't have to practice as much, nor does it mean that players with smaller hands can't achieve greatness. It does make sense to explore this topic and potentially adjust hand postures or certain techniques. In this video we're going to take a look at 4 hands that I've measured at NAMM from a few of my favorite players. Baxty, Rafaels Hand, a good friend Eric Garcia, and me. I'm going to analyze my hand as well, of course. I've learned some really interesting things from this research, and I highly recommend to watch this video to the end, because especially Eric's case is something that we can all learn from, because that's a kind of really interesting case. But before we dive into their hands, let's take a general quick look about the anatomy of the hand. Basic hand structure. Aside from the thumb, each finger consists of 3 bones: the distal phalanx, the intermediate phalanx, the proximal phalanx, and then there's also the metacarpal bone who connects the fingers to the wrist, but this one is not really interesting for our case today. The thumb lacks an intermediate bone, which makes its structure a little bit different. These bones are connected to the carpal bones, and between them we have joints that allow independent movements. First we have the MCP joint between the metacarpal bone and the proximal phalanx, then the PIP joint between the first and the second finger bones, the proximal phalanx and the intermediate phalanx, and last the DIP joint between the second and the third finger bone, the intermediate phalanx and the distal phalanx. The MCP joint here is responsible for flexing and extending the finger in this kind of direction. The DIP joint is responsible for this movement, and the PIP joint is basically responsible for this movement, but the PIP and the DIP is connected, so you cannot move the PIP without moving the DIP joint. But you can move the DIP and the PIP without moving the MCP joint here. So again, MCP is doing this, PIP and DIP are doing this. And now let's take a look on Baxtys Hand. First, let's check his finger length. His pinky is around 15.8 centimeter long, his ring finger is about 18.6 centimeter, and his middle finger 19.5 centimeter, and his index finger 18.5 centimeter. Stands out here is that Baxty's pinky and ring finger are relatively large. This perfectly fits to his playing style, because Baxty is known for extreme finger stretches that he integrates effortlessly into his shredding. Now let's take a look on Rafaels hand. His pinky is 16 cm long, his ring finger is 18.9 cm long, middle finger 19.5 and the index 18.2. His proportions are similar to Baxty's, with a significantly longer ring finger than index finger. Now let's take a look at my hand. I almost wished I hadn't measured my hand, because I realized while measuring it, I have really big hands. My pinky is 16.4 cm, my ring finger is 19.5 cm, my middle finger 20.9 cm, and my index finger 20 cm. But there's a catch. Even though that my fingers are larger overall, the proportions are different than from Baxtys or Rafaels hand. For example, the difference between Baxtys' pinky and ring finger is only 2.8 centimeter. Rafael's is 2.9 centimeter and mine is 3 centimeter. Also, their ring fingers are longer than the index finger. Mine is the other way around. A few millimeters may first sound not like much, but it can have a significant impact on how we play the guitar and what kind of joints we are using and how our fingers are used to go to the fretboard and leave the fretboard again. However, of course, this is nothing that can be compensated with the right technique and the proper training. Let's take a look on hand positions and playing mechanics from us three before we are going to Eric's case in the end. Baxtys uses a curved and tilted hand position, where his index finger base bone, the proximal phalanx, touches the fretboard. This allows avoiding unnecessary consumption of energy, because here his forearm is fully relaxed. And this is a really important thing in Eric's case that I see in a lot of guitar players. When moving to the lower strings, he rotates into a supination movement, this one here, keeping the thumb in a constant vertical position. In his index finger, he is mostly using the DIP and the PIP joint. Remember, the one that is doing this movement here. His middle finger is a mix out of DIP and MCP joint movement. His ring finger is mainly MCP joint movement, and his pinky is primarily PIP joint with some MCP involved. Despite his curved hand position and having the index finger most of the time touching the fretboard, Baxtys still achieve an impressive reach. And I made a whole video about the correct posture to properly stretch your hand. You can see it right here. And of course, his larger ring and pinky fingers really help for the control in these kind of stretches. Now Rafael. He's also using a curved and tilted hand position, but keeps his index finger less fixed. This gives him more vertical flexibility, but forces to use the MCP joint, which increases more forearm effort. And there you have to understand one thing. Doing this movement here, where we are flexing and extending our MCP joint, requires a lot of force, because especially the extending movement that we need to get off the fretboard in this kind of case is a movement that naturally in our natural behavior is not really strong. Because when in our natural behavior are we doing this, we are more used to do this, to grab something, which more comes from the lumbrialis muscles and from the flexor digitorum muscle, is much stronger movement than extending the fingers, which especially from the MCP joint is coming from this muscle here, the extensor digitorum. This muscle here will become really important in the end of the video, but this muscle is not really naturally a trained muscle compared to this muscle here and the muscles here in our arm. Ring, middle finger and his pinky is mostly MCP joint movement. So in Rafael's movement, we have much more this side of the finger than this side of the finger here. But throughout that, he can achieve another thing that is really cool in his playing. He has an extreme consistency in the posture of his fingers. His fingers are always like this. You know, sometimes in Baxtys playing, or in my playing, where we will talk in a minute about, we change. Sometimes we hit the string like this, the next time we're hitting the string a little bit more flat like this. So there is much more inconsistency in the way how we approach the fretboard on the string. In Rafael's playing, on the other hand, he is extremely consistent. His fingers has always the same position and the same posture. That's definitely something that I want to explore a little bit more in the future, because I believe that this can be quite beneficial for our playing. And now let's take a look at my playing style. My index finger is fixed, while my middle and ring finger rely on MCP movement. And my pinky is a problem. It remains constantly extended. And this is actually against my AUCE rule, avoiding unnecessary consumption of energy, because I constantly activate the muscles that is required to extend a finger, because I have constantly my pinky like this. This is super annoying. That's definitely a habit that I want to try to change in the future. I would rather prefer to have the fingers more curved like this, because here in this position I don't activate any muscles at all. This is pretty relaxed. So I would love to have my fingers more like this and not like this. So now let's go to the case of Eric Garcia. First, Eric Garcia is the guitar player of the band Nox Sinister, which is one of my favorite progressive thrash metal bands from the LA area. Definitely worth to check out their first debut record that they released a few years ago, Night Terror. I absolutely love it, so I want to promote it a little bit. So if you are a fan of progressive thrash metal, check out this record. So again, let's check out the lengths of Eric's fingers. First, his pinky is 15.6 centimeter long. His ring finger is 19.5 centimeter long and his middle finger 21 centimeter. His index finger is 18.9 centimeter long. Eric has the largest middle finger of all tested players, but the smallest pinky. The difference between his ring and pinky is almost 4 centimeter, nearly 1 centimeter more than Rafael and Baxtys. Despite this imbalance, Eric plays at a high professional level, and he's compensating by keeping his forearm supinated, again, this movement, maintaining a parallel finger alignment. However, this activates the extensor digitorum muscle, which is responsible for the MCP joint extension. And I talked with a physiotherapist about this phenomenon, because usually the extensor digitorum muscle, which is again this one here, you can really see it and feel it when you're moving your fingers like this, because the muscle is really on an upper level of that muscle structure. This muscle is basically not responsible for doing a supination or pronation movement, for doing this and that movement. That is a whole different muscle, which is more here on that side and is lying much more below. So they don't really affect each other. But the thing is, by supinating, we are stretching that muscle, and you can really feel that. Take your other fingers, feel the muscle where we're moving the finger, and now go from that position to this position. And you can feel how the muscles stretch, how the muscle get activated and a little bit tensed. Relaxed, not relaxed anymore. I used to play a little bit more on that kind of parallel alignment as well in the past. And I realized, oh, I have less control, less precision, and less speed with this kind of hand position. So I changed it back to the normal hand position, this one here. Even though that in this case, my fingers are a little bit farther away from the fret. Now that is the reason why Eric is doing this extreme parallel alignment, because he needs that compensation to have his pinky on kind of the same level like his ring finger or his middle finger. So I talked with Eric about certain solutions, and one solution is a solution that I don't like personally too much, is to keep away the pinky as much as possible in his playing and rely his playing a little bit more on these three fingers. That could be beneficial for certain 3-note per string runs, or certain kind of, the 1, 2, 3 kind of patterns, which we usually would play with index, ring, and pinky, that he's playing it with index, middle, and ring, like Andy James, for example, is doing this as well. But this can also lead to certain limitations in some other licks. And the second solution is that he's going a little bit more into the neutral position, so that he's not activating the extensor digitorum muscle so much. There, I just recommended to him to try it out a little bit and experiment a little bit with how that feels, because he started to have that parallel alignment, because he thought he need to have it so extreme because of the imbalance between his pinky and his ring finger. But maybe this is not even the case. Avoiding the unnecessary consumption of energy could benefit in the end a little bit more in his playing. What do we learn out of this? Incorrect hand positions can create unnecessary difficulties. We sometimes think that the movement or posture that we have is natural, but our brain is tricking us actually, because sometimes to have an efficient and a really good movement, we have to first train it and to experience it. Just because something happens naturally doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way to do it, because our brain does not know it the other way around. So sometimes we have to learn and adapt a certain posture or a certain movement, even though that in the first place it may feel not natural. The same, of course, with the right hand. And everybody who's picking out of the arm or is doing this kind of stuff, holding the pick like this or holding the pick like this. I talked a lot about this. No, we are not doing this here on my channel. Because sometimes a more efficient movement and posture needs to be consciously trained. I think it is really, really important to create an awareness about our hands and what we are doing. I preached that a lot for the right hand. I will now preach it more for the left hand as well. Because for me, learning about my hand really helps to understand certain aspects and maybe change a certain movement or posture. So sometimes it's totally fine to grab one of these things, which is kind of the most German thing ever, and just to measure your hands, see how the fingers are related to each other, film yourself, analyze the playing, understand which kind of joints you are using. And when you have certain struggles in your left hand, like speed, endurance, or precision, it sometimes helps to change the posture in a certain way. But of course, it's not a magic pill, and nothing will replace the good old practicing 4 hours long, extremely hard and painful without having any results. Because that's the story of my life, basically. So much for this video. I hope you liked this little video. If you liked it and haven't subscribed to this channel yet, then please subscribe. And I'm going to see you in my next video. Cheers and power your progress.